Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, we are going to go over how to improve the UI UX of our Battleship game and also see how we can incorporate the implementation of the artificial intelligence, placing its board pieces onto the board. So let's go ahead and start sharing the screen and dive into it. All right, so we have Unity up and running. So let's go ahead and quickly do a run through of exactly what we are doing. And then afterwards, we'll jump into the actual explanation of it. So notice that the user interface has been updated with the proper texture files and etc. And we cover how you can apply textures to your user interface. But let's go ahead and place our particular pieces onto the board. So let's go ahead and place those, change the orientation. As we are changing the orientation, notice that we have a visual feedback indicating the actual orientation of the piece that we are going to be placing onto the board and so forth. So once we have finished placing all of our pieces, you would notice that the AI has gone ahead and also placed its pieces onto the board. And this over here is just a visualization, as I indicated, for us to be able to debug our code logic while we are developing this game. So this won't be rendered on the final aspect in the final of the release game. But for now, we are going to be utilizing it to visualize where the AI is placing the actual pieces onto the board. And we are color coding it so we know whether it's horizontal or vertical. All right, so this is what we are going to cover today, and let's jump right into it. I'm going to go ahead and click on stop. And let's go ahead and take a look at the easy stuff first, which is the UI UX. So double click on the canvas, which we have already built. And let's go ahead and switch over to the 2D view version of it. And it's really nice to actually have this other selection tool as well, because it visualizes the boundaries of the rect transform. So over here, if you recall from our previous episodes, when we were actually building the layout, you notice that we have a couple of panels. So we have the orientation panel, which is containing this particular button that is going to represent the orientation of the ship to be placed. We have our exit panel that contains the restart game or reset game and also the exit game. And then we have the actual board pieces panel where we have visualizing all of the pieces that you're eventually going to be placing onto the board. So we already had all of these buttons in place. All we did is basically import some of the textures that I already predefined and created. And generally speaking, you would utilize another tool, a photo editing tool such as Photoshop or any other photo editing tool to basically create your textures. And once those textures have been created, you would bring it into the Unity project. And once they are in the Unity project, one thing you would need to do for UI textures is that you would click on the texture, select all of the textures. And from the texture type, you want to make sure that you change it to Sprite 2D and UI. And this will make sure that it's going to be compatible for the particular UI element that you're going to associate it with. So in this particular case, we basically just have 5 buttons. And what we have done is that for each image component of those buttons, we have assigned the actual texture associated with that particular piece simply by dragging and dropping that over there. The actual hookup, the on-click events have been already incorporated, and we discussed how to implement and configure this in a previous episode. So make sure you go and review that. But basically, we have a UI manager where it's going to call a specific function that's registered, and we are passing it a particular identification as far as which piece we are going to be placing onto the board now. So all of these other buttons pretty much are the same, right? So once you have created and designed your texture, the next thing you want to do is bring over your texture and put it into the actual project. Change the texture type. Make sure the texture type is Sprite 2D and UI. This way it's going to be compatible with the actual UI elements. And all you're going to do is like assign it to the image source, and then you should be good to go. Now that we have covered the UI UX, let's switch over to how we are going to implement the AI for the board. All right, so now that we have seen how to do the UI UX, let's jump over to the board manager and see what kind of enhancements we have done on the board manager and when to actually kickstart or initiate the AI component and let the AI place its board onto the board. So let's go ahead and double click on the board manager. And all right, so now that we are on the board manager, let's scroll down all the way to the place where the actual implementation of AI board logic kicks in. So in the update loop, once we have placed all of the player's pieces, what we are going to do is we are going to determine if it's the enemy's turn to place its pieces. And if that's the case, what we are doing is that we have created this place ships function in the AI board class. And basically what we are doing is that we are invoking that function. And right afterwards, we are going to raise our custom event to start the game, which also will be covered in the next episode. So let's take a look at how the AI is actually placing its ships onto the board. So let's go ahead and get into that particular function. So in place ships, we obviously are going to iterate over the actual ship sizes. And this is a data structure that we have implemented over here. So we have 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. These are the actual sizes, the blocks that the ship is going to cover. And we are going to be utilizing that to kind of orient our piece onto the board, which is going to be in a random range between the rows and the columns from 0 to 9, which is basically 1 to 10. We have 10 columns on the board. And then basically we are going to, again, determine our orientation based on a random value over here between 0 and 9. If anything's over 5, then the orientation is going to be either vertical, or if it's less, it's going to be horizontal. And what we do next is basically we are going to call the check port for placement, passing in the row and the column and the actual size of the ship currently that we want to be placed onto the board. And the orientation, again, these are all randomly randomized. And within this function, we check to see if those particular rows and column units are available for placement or not. If they're available for placement, we check to see if they are occupied. We check their boundaries, and if everything's good, then we go ahead and mark it as this particular, in this particular case, we indicate that, okay, this particular row and column that we are looking at is already occupied. So let's go ahead and generate a new row and column, and we call the function again. So checkboard for placement is actually a recursive function. It's going to call itself until all of the boards have been placed. If all of the pieces have been placed appropriately, if there's any conflicts. And down here, basically, we determine to see if it's okay to place that particular piece onto the board. And if it is, we check whether it's a horizontal or vertical orientation. Similarly, as we do for the player, we check the boundaries. And then we have our for loop that is going to be indicating as far as the size of the ship. And basically what it does is that is going to determine for that particular grid location onto the board if that particular board unit is occupied or not. And if it's occupied, then basically we don't do anything. And if it's not occupied, we say that it's okay to place. Once that's done, we determined, and this is kind of like simulating the unclick button for the player. Once we have gone through this iteration and we understand that it's okay to place those pieces onto the board, the next step that we are doing is that we are actually going to place the pieces onto the board and record them into the 2D array. And this is where we instantiate those cubes that we have seen during runtime on their particular locations, changing the material to either yellow or magenta, depending on the orientation. So if it's vertical, it's going to be, if it's horizontal, it's going to be yellow. And if it's vertical, it's going to be magenta. And that's how the AI basically is placing its board pieces onto the board. So let's go back to the editor and let's click run one more time. And let's go ahead and place our pieces. So right now we are still in the board manager where we are basically allowing the player to place its pieces onto the board, depending on the orientation. And once that's done, immediately afterwards, the code that tells the AI board to generate and place its pieces onto the board is called. And basically, there's going to be a loop where it's going to loop through the ships that it needs to place onto the board. And then there's going to be a recursive function where it checks to see if that particular ship, based on its randomly selected column and row and its orientation, is going to be available to be placed onto the location, that particular location onto the board or not. And that's basically what's happening with this code over here. And okay, so as you saw, it's pretty straightforward on the implementation of the AI currently as far as placing the pieces onto the board. So make sure to like and subscribe. And this particular code is going to be available on the Patreon page. Make sure to go and become a member over there. The membership to receive the code base and all of this Unity projects is actually free. So there's different types of tiers over there. There's the free tier membership, and majority of the code that I'm discussing here during the YouTube video tutorial series are going to be under the free membership. And of course, there's paid membership too, but that's for getting engaged and having more one-on-one discussions and having to work together on more complicated projects. All right, thank you for stopping by, and talk to you guys soon. See you guys soon. In the next episode, we'll actually start incorporating some of the game mechanics as far as how to start hitting the ships based on selection of the board units. Have a good one. See you guys. Bye-bye.